being pulled over by a cop who's already decided you're guilty just because of the color of your skin. That's exactly what happened to Keisha Johnson in Austin, Texas. Keisha Johnson, a 28-year-old single mom and community advocate from Austin, Texas, was driving home from work one evening when her life took a turn she never expected. As she approached an intersection, the traffic light turned yellow. She slowed down, but the light turned red just as she entered the intersection. Moments later, flashing lights appeared in her rearview mirror. It was Officer Brad Miller, a local cop with a reputation for being overly aggressive, especially with black drivers. Keisha pulled over, her heart racing. She knew she hadn't run the red light, but Officer Miller was already at her window, his tone sharp and accusatory. "License and registration," he barked, not even bothering to explain why he had stopped her. Keisha handed over her documents, but the way he looked at her like she was a criminal made her stomach churn. Things escalated quickly. Officer Miller insisted she had run the light, even though Keisha calmly explained she hadn't. He dismissed her words, his voice dripping with condescension. "Stay in the car," he ordered before returning to his patrol car. Keisha sat there, feeling humiliated and angry. She knew this wasn't about a traffic violation. It was about the color of her skin. When Officer Miller returned, he handed her a ticket and a warning to drive more carefully. But the damage was done. Keisha felt powerless, like just another black person being targeted by a system that didn't care about her. She thought about her son at home, waiting for her, and how she didn't want him to grow up in a world where this kind of treatment was normal. That night, Keisha made a decision. She wasn't going to let this slide. She filed a formal complaint against Officer Miller, but the police department brushed it off, claiming there wasn't enough evidence to support her claims. Frustrated but determined, Keisha knew she had to take things further. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for everyone who'd ever been treated unfairly because of their race. And she was about to reveal something that would change everything. Keisha knew filing a complaint with the police department wasn't going to be enough. She had seen how the system worked, how complaints against officers like Brad Miller were often swept under the rug. But she wasn't the type to back down. As a regional director for a prominent U.S. organization dedicated to fighting racial injustice, Keisha had spent years working to dismantle systemic racism. She had connections, resources, and a deep understanding of how to navigate these systems. This wasn't just personal anymore. It was about holding someone accountable for their actions and setting a precedent. Keisha reached out to her network, starting with a trusted lawyer named Marcus Green, who specialized in civil rights cases. Marcus listened to her story, reviewed the dashcam footage from her traffic stop, and immediately agreed to take her case. Together, they began building a strong argument. They gathered evidence of Officer Miller's history of biased behavior, including testimonies from other black drivers who had been unfairly targeted by him. One woman shared how Miller had pulled her over for driving too slowly in a residential area, while another man recounted being accused of looking suspicious while waiting for a bus. As the case moved forward, Keisha also reached out to local activists and community leaders. She knew this wasn't just about her, it was about shedding light on a larger pattern of racial profiling within the police department. News of her case began to spread, and soon people were rallying behind her. Social media posts, local news coverage, and even a hashtag, #JusticeForKeisha, started gaining traction. The community was fed up, and Keisha's courage gave them a voice. Meanwhile, Officer Miller remained confident. He had been through complaints before and had always come out unscathed. He showed up to court with his union lawyer, ready to defend himself. But what he didn't know was that Keisha had spent weeks preparing. She wasn't just bringing her own experience to the table. She was bringing a mountain of evidence and a network of people who were ready to stand with her. The courtroom was tense as the trial began. Miller's lawyer tried to paint Keisha as just another angry black woman, trying to cause trouble. But Keisha stayed calm and focused. She knew the truth was on her side. And when it was her turn to speak, she was ready to reveal something that would change everything. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with tension. Officer Brad Miller sat confidently at the defense table, his lawyer by his side, ready to dismantle Keisha's claims. They had a plan: paint her as an overreacting driver trying to exploit the system. But Keisha wasn't nervous. She sat tall, her lawyer Marcus Green beside her, ready to present their case. When it was Keisha's turn to take the stand, she walked up calmly, her head held high. The prosecutor began by asking her to recount the events of the traffic stop. Keisha spoke clearly, detailing how Officer Miller had treated her with disdain from the moment he approached her car. She described the way he dismissed her explanation, the way he looked at her like she was guilty before he even knew her name. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Marcus stood up and asked Keisha about her work. "Can you tell the court what you do for a living?" he asked. Keisha took a deep breath and revealed her role as the regional director of a powerful U.S. organization dedicated to fighting racial injustice. The room fell silent. Even the judge leaned forward, intrigued. Keisha explained how her work had given her a front-row seat to the systemic racism embedded in institutions like law enforcement. She talked about the countless stories she had heard from people who had been targeted because of their skin color, stories just like hers. Then Marcus presented the evidence they'd gathered: dashcam footage from Keisha's traffic stop, testimonies from other black drivers who had been harassed by Officer Miller, and even internal reports showing a pattern of complaints against him that had been ignored. Officer Miller's confidence began to waver. His lawyer tried to object, but the evidence was too strong. The judge allowed it all to be presented. When Marcus finished, he turned to Keisha and asked, "Why did you decide to take this to court?" Keisha looked directly at the judge and said, "Because this isn't just about me. It's about every person who's ever been treated unfairly because of the color of their skin. If we don't hold people accountable, nothing will ever change." The room was silent. Even Officer Miller couldn't meet her gaze. The judge took a moment before speaking, and when he did, it was clear Keisha had won more than just her case. She had exposed a truth that couldn't be ignored. If you believe in standing up against injustice, hit that subscribe button.